Tommy O'Neill leaned back in his worn-out armchair, the evening news murmuring softly in the background. The room was filled with the quiet comforts of a life long lived. Framed photos of family, a mantel lined with medals, and an old radio humming softly beside him. But then, a noise shattered the peace. A faint tink of glass breaking. Tommy's senses snapped into sharp focus, his hand tightening on the armrest. He rose slowly, his cane steadying him as he moved toward the hallway. The familiar weight of his service days pressed on his shoulders, urging him forward. Peering around the corner, he saw him, a young man, no older than 20, nervously rifling through his bookshelf. Tommy took a deep breath, then cleared his throat. "Looking for something?" he asked softly. The young man froze, his back stiffening. Slowly, he turned, his eyes wide with shock. Tommy tilted his head slightly, his gaze never leaving the intruder's face. "You picked the wrong house, son," he said quietly. And in that moment, the young man's expression shifted, from fear to something else entirely. Curiosity. "Who are you?" he whispered. Tommy smiled faintly, his eyes sharp and knowing. "Someone you don't want to mess with," he murmured. "Now, why don't we have a little chat?" The young man's eyes darted to the window and then back to the cane in Tommy's hand. He shifted uncomfortably, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. Tommy took a slow step forward, his gaze steady and calm. "Relax, son. I'm not calling the police," Tommy said quietly, keeping his voice low and even. "Not yet, anyway." The young man blinked, confusion crossing his face. "Why wouldn't you? I broke into your house." Tommy shrugged slightly. "You don't look like the kind of person who does this often, and you're definitely not a professional." He nodded at the messy pile of books scattered across the floor. "A pro would know how to search without making a mess." The young man swallowed hard, his hands trembling. He took a step back, glancing around as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. Look, I'm just here to... I didn't..." "Take a deep breath, son," Tommy interrupted gently. "Start with your name." The young man hesitated, then lowered his gaze to the floor. "It's Tyler," he mumbled. "Tyler Matthews." Tommy nodded slowly. "Well, Tyler, let's figure out why you're here, He gestured to the armchair across from his own. "Sit. Let's have a chat." Tyler stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. You want me to sit?" "Yes, sit," Tommy repeated firmly, "before I change my mind about the police." After a long pause, Tyler edged forward cautiously and lowered himself into the chair, his posture rigid. He watched Tommy warily, his eyes darting between the old man and the door. Tommy eased himself back into his own chair, resting his cane across his lap. "Now, tell me, why break into my house? What are you looking for?" Tyler opened his mouth, then closed it again, his brow furrowed in confusion. I wasn't looking for anything," he muttered. "I just—" "Try again, son," Tommy interrupted softly. "You're not here for the TV or the old records, and you didn't just pick this house at random. Someone sent you, am I right?" Tyler's eyes widened, his breath hitching. "How did you—" "Let's just say I've been around long enough to know when someone's being used," Tommy said quietly. "So, who's pulling your strings?" For a moment, Tyler looked like he was going to bolt, but something in Tommy's calm, unwavering gaze seemed to hold him in place. Slowly, he slumped back in the chair, his shoulders sagging in defeat. "All right, fine," he muttered. There's this group. They find people like me and give us jobs." "People like you?" Tommy repeated, raising an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Tyler hesitated, glancing down at his hands. "People who don't have a choice," he whispered. I've got debts, okay? Big ones. They said they'd help me pay them off, but only if I did a few favors." "And one of those favors was breaking into my house?" Tommy asked. Tyler nodded miserably. "Yeah, they said I had to find something. Some kind of document, I think, but I don't even know what it is." Tommy's heart skipped a beat. A document? Could it be? He took a slow, steady breath, keeping his expression neutral. Did they tell you what this document was for? He asked quietly. No, Tyler admitted, shaking his head. Just that it was really old and really important. They said if I found it, they'd clear my debts. But if I didn't... He trailed off, his voice breaking. Tommy leaned forward slightly. What happens if you don't? Tyler squeezed his eyes shut. They'll come after me. And not just me. My family, too. For a long moment, the room was silent, the weight of Tyler's words hanging heavy in the air. Tommy studied the young man's face. The fear, the desperation, the resignation. This wasn't just a petty thief trying to make a quick buck. This was a young man trapped in a web of threats and coercion, caught up in something far bigger than he realized. And Tommy knew he couldn't just sit back and do nothing. All right, son, he said softly. I believe you. Tyler looked up, startled. You do? Yes, and I'm going to help you, Tommy continued, his voice firm. But I need you to do exactly as I say. Understand? Tyler nodded frantically. Yes, anything. Just, please, don't let them hurt my family. Tommy's eyes softened. I won't, he promised. But we need to make it look like you're still on their side. If they think you've failed, they'll send someone else, someone who won't just be looking for a document. Tyler swallowed hard, his face pale. What do we do? Tommy leaned back, his mind racing. First, we're going to make sure they think you found what you were looking for. Tyler frowned in confusion. But I didn't find anything. Tommy's lips curved into a faint smile. That's where I come in. Tyler paced nervously as Tommy rummaged through an old box of papers in the corner of the living room. The young man's eyes darted toward the door every few seconds, as if expecting someone to burst in and drag him away. Relax, son, Tommy murmured without looking up. No one's coming. Not yet, anyway. Not yet? Tyler echoed, his voice shaking. What do you mean, not yet? Tommy glanced up, his expression calm. I mean, we're going to give them something to find. Something that will keep them off your back long enough for us to figure out who's behind all this. Tyler's brow furrowed. But what if they realize it's fake? They won't, Tommy assured him. Not if we do this right. He pulled out an old yellowed envelope, his gaze thoughtful. This, he murmured softly, holding up the envelope, is going to buy us some time. What is that? Tyler asked, leaning forward. An old war letter, Tommy explained. Not the real thing, but close enough. We'll plant it somewhere they can find it, and when they do, they'll think they've got what they're looking for. Tyler blinked, disbelief and hope warring on his face. You really think it'll work? Tommy smiled faintly. Trust me, son. I've been in tighter spots than this. He handed the envelope to Tyler, his gaze steady. Now, listen carefully. Here's what we're going to do. Tommy pointed to the basement window. We'll leave the letter in there. Make it look like you stashed it while you were scouting around for the real document. Once they find it, they'll think they've got a piece of the puzzle. It'll buy us some time. Tyler hesitated, looking from the old house to the envelope in his hand. But won't they know it's a fake if they check it too closely? Maybe, Tommy admitted. But by the time they figure that out, we'll be long gone, and they'll have wasted resources chasing shadows. Taking a deep breath, Tyler nodded. Okay, let's do it. They moved quickly, keeping low and out of sight as they made their way to the basement window. Tommy carefully pried open a loose board, creating just enough space for Tyler to slip the envelope inside and wedge it securely between the cracks in the wall. Good, Tommy murmured, stepping back to survey their work. Now, here's the important part. When you meet with your handler later, you need to be nervous. Make them think you're worried they'll find out what you did. Tyler frowned. So, act guilty? Exactly, Tommy said with a nod. But don't be too obvious, just enough for them to think they've scared you into making a mistake. I think I can do that, Tyler said slowly, his expression thoughtful. Good. After that, you're going to tell them you need more time to find the real document, Tommy continued. That'll make them think you're still useful to them, and they'll hold off on sending someone else. Tyler nodded, his shoulders relaxing a fraction. Okay, I can do that. Tommy clapped him gently on the back. "That's the spirit, son. Now let's get out of here before anyone sees us." The next evening, Tommy waited patiently outside a small cafe on the corner of 4th and Maple. It was one of those old-fashioned diners that hadn't changed much since the 1950s, with checkered floors, chrome stools, and a soft glow from the neon sign outside. A perfect place to blend in. He glanced at his watch and then looked up as Tyler appeared at the corner, his face pale but determined. The young man spotted Tommy and hurried over, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "Did you do it?" Tommy asked quietly as Tyler slid into the booth opposite him. Tyler nodded quickly. "Yeah, I did exactly what you said. I told them about the house, the envelope, everything. The guy, the handler, he seemed suspicious at first, but when I started stammering and looking nervous, he backed off." Tommy raised an eyebrow. "And he said they'll check out the house," Tyler finished, his voice hushed. "He told me to stay put and not do anything stupid until they get back." Tommy nodded slowly, relief washing over him. "Good. That means they've taken the bait." Tyler leaned forward, his gaze searching Tommy's face. "But what do we do now? They're going to realize it's fake eventually." "That's why we need to move fast," Tommy replied. "We've bought ourselves a little time, but we need to find out who's really behind this before they catch on." Tyler swallowed hard. You think it's more than just some local thugs, don't you?" "I do," Tommy said softly. "Someone wants that document badly enough to send a team of people after it. That means they're hiding something big, something they can't afford to let slip out. But why would they think you have it?" Tyler asked, frowning. Tommy hesitated, his gaze distant. "Because once upon a time I did. And if they think I still have it, it means they know more about my past than I thought." Tyler's eyes widened. "Wait, so it's real? The document they're looking for, it actually exists?" Tommy nodded slowly. "It does, but I'm not letting it fall into the wrong hands." Tyler stared at him, his mind racing. "So, what's the plan?" Tommy leaned forward, his expression serious. "We're going to find out who's pulling the strings, and to do that, we need to follow the trail back to the source." Tyler blinked. "How do we do that?" Tommy smiled faintly. "By going straight to the top." The next few days were a whirlwind of careful planning and tense anticipation. With Tyler's help, Tommy pieced together the information they'd gathered from the handler and began mapping out the organization's structure. It wasn't easy. The Red Fist operated in the shadows, using front businesses and layers of middlemen to keep their true leaders hidden. But Tommy's experience and Tyler's willingness to help gave them an edge. "There's a name that keeps coming up," Tyler said one evening, spreading a series of notes across the table. "Mason Granger. He's not the leader, but he's definitely high up." Tommy's eyes narrowed. "Granger? I know that name. He's a big deal in the city," Tyler continued. "Owns a bunch of properties downtown. Real estate, nightclubs, that kind of thing. That's how they're laundering the money," Tommy muttered, more to himself than to Tyler. "They use the legitimate businesses as a cover for their operations." "So, what do we do?" Tyler asked hesitantly. "We pay him a visit," Tommy said simply. "But we need to be smart about it." Tyler's face paled. You mean like, just walk up to him?" "Not exactly," Tommy replied, his gaze thoughtful. "We need to get his attention. Make him think he's meeting with someone important." Tyler frowned in confusion. "Like who?" Tommy smiled slowly. "Like an old friend of his." Tyler stood nearby, fidgeting nervously as he watched Tommy straighten his tie in the small, cracked mirror. The old veteran looked surprisingly sharp in a tailored charcoal gray suit and polished shoes. The transformation was startling. Gone was the quiet, retired man from the small suburban house. Instead, he looked every bit the confident, imposing figure of a man with authority and purpose. "It's going to work," Tommy said firmly, his gaze meeting Tyler's in the reflection. "Mason Granger only deals with people he thinks are on his level. We need to show him that I'm not just some nobody off the street. But what if he recognizes you?" Tyler asked quietly. "What if he figures out you're not who you say you are?" Tommy turned slowly, his expression serious. That's a risk we have to take. The only way to get close enough to Granger is to make him think I'm someone important, someone he can't afford to ignore. Tyler swallowed hard. Okay? But who are you supposed to be? Tommy's lips curved into a faint smile. An old associate of his from out of town, a man with connections, influence, and certain interests in the city. Tyler blinked, his brow furrowing. But you don't know any of his old associates, right? Tommy's smile widened. That's the beauty of it. People like Granger know a lot of people, but they never really know anyone. As long as I act like I belong, he won't dare question it. Tyler shook his head slowly, disbelief etched on his face. You're crazy, you know that? Tommy chuckled softly. Maybe, but sometimes crazy is what it takes. With one final adjustment to his collar, he turned to face Tyler fully, his expression resolute. Ready? Tyler took a deep breath, nodding reluctantly. Yeah. Ready as I'll ever be. Good, Tommy murmured. Let's go. The Blue Flame Club was a sprawling, upscale establishment in the heart of downtown, known for its exclusivity and high-profile clientele. With its polished marble floors, sparkling chandeliers, and rich mahogany furnishings, it looked like the kind of place where fortunes were made and lost in the blink of an eye. Tommy and Tyler approached the entrance, the bouncer eyeing them warily. Tyler shifted nervously beside Tommy, but the older man kept his expression cool and confident, as if he belonged there. Name? The bouncer grunted, his gaze flicking between Tommy and Tyler. Edward Thompson, Tommy replied smoothly, and this is my associate. The bouncer frowned, glancing down at a clipboard. You're not on the list. Tommy raised an eyebrow, his expression faintly amused. I'm not here to see just anyone. I'm here for Mason Granger. The bouncer's eyes narrowed. Mr. Granger doesn't take uninvited guests. Tommy leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. Tell him that Eddie's here to discuss the project he's been waiting on. He'll know what I mean. For a long moment, the bouncer stared at him, suspicion and uncertainty flickering across his face. Then, with a reluctant grunt, he stepped back and muttered something into his earpiece. Tommy waited patiently, his expression calm. He could feel Tyler's anxiety radiating off him, but he didn't let it show. This was the critical moment, the point where everything could either fall into place or collapse completely. Finally, the bouncer nodded. Follow me, he said gruffly. They were led through a maze of hallways, the music and laughter from the main club fading into the background. Tyler glanced around nervously, his gaze lingering on the well-dressed patrons and the dark-suited guards stationed at strategic points. Tommy, on the other hand, kept his gaze focused straight ahead, his posture relaxed but alert. He knew places like this well, places where power and influence mingled behind closed doors, hidden from prying eyes. The trick was to move like you belonged, to act like you were untouchable. And tonight, that's exactly what he was. The bouncer stopped in front of a set of heavy double doors and rapped sharply. A moment later, the doors swung open, revealing a spacious office lined with bookshelves and fine art. At the center of the room, behind an enormous oak desk, sat a man in his mid-50s with graying hair and a sharp suit. Mason Granger. Granger looked up as they entered, his gaze sweeping over Tommy and Tyler with a calculating intensity. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Tommy smiled faintly. "Eddie Thompson," he said calmly, stepping forward. "I'm here to talk business." Granger's eyes narrowed. "I don't remember inviting you." "You didn't," Tommy replied smoothly. "But considering what's at stake, I thought it was time we had a little chat, face to face." Granger leaned back slowly, his gaze never leaving Tommy's face. "And what exactly do you think we have to talk about?" Tommy's smile widened slightly. "I think we both know what I'm talking about. The document." Granger's eyes flickered, surprise and suspicion flashing in their depths. "The document?" he repeated slowly. "Yes," Tommy said softly. "The one you've been sending your people all over town to find. The one that could expose a lot of very powerful people if it were to say, fall into the wrong hands. For a moment, Granger just stared at him, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, cold, sharp, and dangerous. "You're either very brave or very stupid, Mr. Thompson," he murmured. "Maybe a little of both," Tommy replied lightly. "But I'm also someone who can help you. For the right price." Granger's gaze darkened. "And why should I believe anything you say?" Tommy leaned forward slightly, his gaze locking with Granger's. "Because I know where the document is, and if you play your cards right, I might be willing to let you have it." Tyler shifted uneasily beside him, but Tommy kept his focus on Granger, willing him to take the bait. For a long moment, the room was silent, the tension crackling in the air like a live wire. Then, slowly, Granger leaned back in his chair, his smile widening. "All right, Mr. Thompson," he said softly. "You have my attention." With Granger's interest piqued, Tommy carefully maneuvered the conversation, dropping just enough hints and half-truths to keep him intrigued. He spoke confidently, weaving a story of hidden secrets and old alliances, making it sound as if he had access to the very information Granger had been chasing for months. But Tommy was careful not to give away too much. He needed Granger to trust him, but not completely. Not yet. "You say you know where it is," Granger said finally, his gaze sharp. "Prove it." Tommy smiled faintly. "I will. But first, we need to talk terms." Granger raised an eyebrow. "Terms?" "Yes," Tommy said calmly. "You want that document, and I want something in return. Something that shows me you're serious about making a deal." Granger's smile turned cold. "And what exactly do you want?" Tommy leaned forward slightly, his expression deadly serious. "I want you to leave the kid alone," he said quietly, nodding toward Tyler. "No more threats, no more intimidation. You let him walk away, free and clear." Granger's gaze flicked to Tyler, his expression unreadable. "You're willing to risk your life for him?" "I'm willing to do whatever it takes," Tommy replied evenly. "But that's my condition. You leave him alone and I'll lead you to the document." For a long moment, Granger just stared at him. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Fine," he murmured. "You have a deal." But as he leaned back in his chair, his smile widened, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Tommy's stomach tightened. He'd won the first round, but the game was far from over. Tommy could feel the weight of the room shift as Granger's gaze darkened. The deal was struck, but both men knew the game was far from over. With Tyler's safety temporarily secured, Tommy maintained his calm demeanor, even as Granger's guards subtly edged closer. "Very well, Mr. Thompson," Granger said smoothly, leaning back in his chair. "You've got yourself a deal, but I'm a man who likes to see results. If you can't produce this document, our agreement is null and void, and the consequences, well, they won't just be on your head." Tommy's eyes flicked to Tyler, who was trying his best to look composed despite the visible tremor in his hands. "Don't worry," Tommy replied, his voice low and firm. "You'll get what you're looking for." With that, he stood, straightening his jacket. "You'll hear from me soon," he added, turning sharply and nodding for Tyler to follow. Granger watched them go, a gleam of suspicion in his eyes. As they stepped out of the club and into the cool night air, Tyler let out a long, shaky breath. "You really think he bought it?" he whispered, his gaze darting around nervously. "He bought it for now," Tommy murmured, scanning the street. "But we don't have much time. We need to move fast and make sure he's left grasping at straws by the time he realizes what's really going on." Tyler swallowed hard. "So, what's the plan?" Tommy smiled faintly. "The plan is to lead him on a chase so confusing he won't know what's real and what isn't. By the time we're through, he won't just be looking for a document. He'll be too busy trying to figure out how he got played." The young man stared at him, disbelief mingling with something else, admiration. You're really going to do all that for me?" Tommy glanced at him, his expression softening. "For you, and for anyone else they think they can push around. People like Granger thrive on fear and manipulation. They think they can take whatever they want and get away with it." He paused, his gaze distant for a moment. "But I've spent my whole life fighting people like that, and I'm not about to stop now." Tyler's throat tightened. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," Tommy replied quietly. "Just promise me one thing." "Anything," Tyler whispered. "Promise me that when this is over, you'll walk away from all of it. No more favors, no more debts. You make a clean break and start fresh." Tyler nodded slowly, his gaze steady. "I will, I promise." Tommy smiled, a hint of relief in his eyes. "Good. Now, let's get to work." 2 weeks later, Tommy stood on his front porch, the early morning sun casting a soft glow over the quiet neighborhood. He watched as Tyler approached, a hesitant smile on his face. "It's done," Tyler said softly, stopping at the bottom of the steps. "Granger's scrambling. He's got half his people chasing leads that don't exist, and the other half trying to figure out where it all went wrong." Tommy nodded slowly. "And the document?" "Safe," Tyler assured him. "Exactly where you said it would be. He'll never find it." Tommy's smile widened slightly. "Good. Then I think it's time you got out of here. Head to that school you were talking about. Get a fresh start." Tyler hesitated, then nodded firmly. "I will, but I'll keep in touch, right? Just to let you know how things are going." Tommy's eyes softened. "I'd like that." With one last, lingering look, Tyler turned and walked away, his steps lighter than they had been in a long time. Tommy watched him go, a quiet satisfaction settling over him. As he turned to head back inside, a familiar voice called out from behind. "Tommy O'Neill, still causing trouble after all these years?" Tommy turned, his eyes widening in surprise as a tall figure stepped out from the shadows, a man with graying hair and a wry smile. "Pete?" Tommy breathed, disbelief mingling with joy. "Thought you could use a little help," Pete said lightly, crossing his arms. "Figured it was about time I got back in the game." Tommy shook his head, a laugh bubbling up in his chest. "You old fool," he murmured. "What are you doing here?" "Same thing you are," Pete replied with a grin. "Keeping the world safe, one step at a time." Tommy's smile widened. "Well then, welcome back." And as the two old friends turned and headed inside, there was a sense of something new on the horizon, something bigger than either of them could have imagined. In the end, Tommy didn't just save Tyler, he reminded the world that age is no barrier to courage, and that some battles are worth fighting no matter how old you are. His cleverness and resilience turned a dangerous situation into an opportunity for hope and change. If you enjoyed this story of bravery, wit, and unexpected friendship, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that it's never too late to make a difference, and that true strength comes from standing up for what's right. And if you want to see more inspiring stories like this, subscribe to our channel, hit that like button, and leave a comment below. Let us know what you think Tommy and Pete's next adventure should be, because heroes like them, they're just getting started. Until next time, remember, no matter your age or circumstances, there's always a chance to change the world around you, one small act of courage at a time. See you in the next story.